When you mention World War I to most Britons and ask them to name a military leader, the best you'll probably get from most is General Douglas Haig. The image of Britain's World War I generals, not least from films like Oh What a Lovely War and comedies like Blackadder, is that the British generals were out-of-touch toffs, the donkeys who were leading the brave lions. But there's one general who breaks that mould. A man from humble beginnings who had worked as a footman in a country house and had enlisted as a private soldier back in the 1870s, when flogging was still practised as a military punishment. A man who rose all the way to the very top, who was knighted and counted the king as a friend. Field Marshal Sir William Robertson. William Robertson was born in January 1860 in the village of Wellbourne in Lincolnshire. Even now, the village, 11 miles south of Lincoln, has a population of just over 600. So imagine just how sleepy and out of the way it was back in Victorian times. His father was the village postmaster and tailor, and young William, nicknamed Woofy, attended the village school, where he seems to have actually had an above average ability to learn quickly and to retain information. So much so that the rector of the local church was so impressed that he gave him extra tuition, and when Robertson finished his schooling at the age of 13, he became a servant at the rectory and continued his informal studies with the rector. He moved on to become a footman at Dean Park, a large stately home in the neighbouring county of Northamptonshire. It was the home of the Countess of Cardigan, widow of Lord Cardigan of Charge of the Light Brigade fame. But for reasons unknown, in November 1877, he had a complete career change, enlisting underage as a private in the British Army. Robertson was assigned to a cavalry unit, the 16th Queen's Own Lancers. Now, the army of 1877 was still very much a relic of the Crimean War, itself a sort of relic of the Napoleonic Wars. The Cardwell reforms that were just trying to update the British Army were still 4 years away. Many of the men in the British Army had signed up for 21 years' service, and they tended to be from the lowest rungs of society. As Robertson himself later recalled, these men were, to his quote, rough, hard-drinking, hard-swearing soldiers. The British Army was not a career option for respectable men. And his mother was distraught with his decision, writing that she was actually ashamed of him, and that she had, in her letter to him, she actually wrote, "I would rather bury you than see you as a redcoat." For a reasonably educated country boy, it must have been a baptism of fire. Indeed, Private Robertson actually planned to desert on his very first night at the barracks, until he found that another soldier had stolen his civilian clothes and had absconded wearing them. Like it or not, William Robertson was stuck in the army. As a bright lad with an aptitude for learning, it really didn't take him long to stand out from the rank and file soldiers around him, and within a year he'd been promoted to Lance Corporal, and less than 12 months after that he had his second stripe as a corporal. In January 1882, just over 4 years after enlisting, he was promoted to sergeant. Robertson later claimed that he was the youngest sergeant in the British Army at the time, both in age and in experience, and he might very well have been. In a previous video, I have talked about Colour Sergeant Bourne at Rorke's Drift in the Zulu War. Bourne was 24 when he was made a sergeant, and he was nicknamed the Kid. Robertson was just 22. No mean feat, especially having to command men who were considerably older and had years more experience than him, even if it was in drinking and swearing. Robertson's rise continued, and within 3 years he was promoted to Troop Sergeant Major. But that new rank also gave him a problem. There was only one non-commissioner officer post ahead of him, Regimental Sergeant Major. But at this time in the British Army, that post was really was awarded on time served. And he hadn't served very much time. He was going to have to wait a long time for an RSM to retire. In other words, he'd gone as far as he could easily go. But there was an alternative: to try to become a commissioned officer. In the 1880s, fewer than half a dozen men each year rose from the ranks to become an officer. Not only were the statistics against Robertson, but so was the cost. Whilst the old practice of purchasing commissions had ended, the lifestyle of an officer meant that a man without financial means would find it prohibitive, not least in the cavalry regiments. Whilst a newly commissioned officer was paid £100 a year, which was considerably more than the £18 a year paid to a lowly private, it probably cost at least £300 a year to maintain an officer lifestyle. Cavalry officers were actually expected to provide their own charger, as well as 2 other horses or polo ponies. They were also expected to pay for their uniforms, their mess bills, which easily hit £10 a month. Remember that the privates were being paid £18 a year. And they even, as officers, had to contribute to the costs of the regimental band. So passing the certificate of education for a bright man like Robertson was not the issue. It was about how he was going to maintain his lifestyle. And it says a lot about people's faith in his abilities that his officers rallied to his challenge. His commanding officer, Colonel Maillard, successfully lobbied for him to join a cavalry unit which was stationed in India, which was considerably cheaper than a cavalry unit based in Britain. And he also paid for Robertson's brand new sword. Another officer stepped up and paid for his saddle. And thus it was on the 27th of June 1888 that 2nd Lieutenant William Robertson joined the 3rd Prince of Wales Dragoon Guards, stationed in India. He had gone from being one of the youngest non-commissioned officers in the British Army to being one of the oldest 2nd Lieutenants, the lowest rung on the officer ladder. Despite the cheaper lifestyle in India, Robertson, the son of the village postmaster and tailor, found it hard to make ends meet. To eke out his salary, he chose not to smoke cigars in the mess, and he drank water rather than alcohol. He also earned extra pay by becoming a translator. As a quick learner with a prodigious memory, he learnt 6 local languages whilst in India. And with these linguistic skills, he not only earned some extra money, but he was soon seconded to the fledgling intelligence branch of the Indian Army. His career as a staff officer had begun, and it was to propel him to the very top of the British Army. He excelled himself as an intelligence officer during the campaign to relieve the siege of Chitral and in the Malakand campaign, a military operation, by the way, which also involved another young cavalry officer, Winston Churchill. His work there earned him a promotion to captain, and also a Distinguished Service Order, the DSO, and a mention in dispatches. Robertson now set his eyes on attending the Staff College at Camberley in England. It was effectively the university for budding staff officers, of whom only 30 from the whole army were selected each year. Having spent 10 days in exams, Robertson missed entry by 1 place. And due to his age, he'd be too old to enter again in the future. But his work as an intelligence officer had not gone unnoticed, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army, Sir George White, successfully lobbied for him to be awarded a wildcard place at the Staff College. You'll come across White in some of my Boer War videos, by the way. He was in command during the siege of Ladysmith. In January 1897, he arrived at the Staff College, and for the next 2 years he studied alongside officers such as Douglas Haig, Edmund Allenby and Archibald Murray, men who would feature heavily in the First World War. Upon completion, he joined the intelligence department at the War Office in London, before heading off to South Africa, where he spent most of the Boer War in the intelligence roles, working for both Lord Roberts and then General Kitchener. Upon conclusion of the Boer War, he returned to London as a full colonel and returned to the War Office, where he headed up the foreign section of the intelligence team. And it was in this role that in late 1902 he presented a paper on a possible British-German alliance. He not only argued that such an alliance was impractical, but it was not in Britain's best interest. He actually concluded that far from being a potential ally, Germany should be regarded as Britain's, and this is his quote, most persistent, deliberate and formidable foe. The paper, not surprisingly, raised eyebrows by its very characteristic Robertson forthrightness. But within 3 years, the Kaiser's belligerent stance during the Morocco crisis seemed to prove him right. Before then, however, Robertson had been promoted to the rank of a Major General and spent 3 years as Commandant of Staff College, the very institution that he had attended just 12 years previously. And there he continued to focus the minds on the up-and-coming officers on the threat presented by Germany. And when that threat finally came to pass in 1914 with the outbreak of the First World War, Robertson was appointed Quartermaster General to the British Expeditionary Force in France and Belgium. And then, in December 1915, he was appointed Chief of the Imperial General Staff. Nowadays simply called the Chief of General Staff, Robertson was the professional head of the British Army. And in this role, reporting to the Secretary of State for War, a politician, he was the senior liaison officer between the British Army and the British government. During the actual period of the First World War, August 1914 through to November 1918, Britain had 5 Chiefs of the Imperial General Staff. The longest serving by a mile was Sir William Robertson. In fact, his 26 months in charge was more than the other 4 combined. No mean feat, considering that it wasn't just the military battles he had to contend with, but battles with politicians too. And Robertson was up against one of the most wily and ambitious of the 20th century politicians, David Lloyd George. It wasn't just a clash of personalities, but in particular the two disagreed fundamentally over the strategy of the war. Robertson and the commander of the army in France, Douglas Haig, were convinced that the war had to be won on the Western Front against Germany. In fact, Robertson believed that all the resources should be sent to the Western Front. And he wanted as many troops available as possible, so he actually came into the role of Chief of the Imperial General Staff, strongly advocating conscription, which he obtained in 1916. On the other hand, Lloyd George, who became Prime Minister, British Prime Minister in 1916, was, along with his political ally Winston Churchill, a committed Easterner. The Easterners, as they were called, believed that if Britain opened new theatres of war in the Middle East and the Balkans against Germany's allies, the Germans would be forced to divert valuable troops away from the Western Front. Maybe they could actually turn the tables and invade Germany from another direction. And hence the ventures in the Dardanelles and Salonika, Egypt, Palestine, and the supports for the Arab revolts with Lawrence of Arabia. To the anger of those Easterners, in July 1916, Robertson transferred 240,000 troops out of Egypt to the Western Front, and he did it without telling the government. That same month he blocked an offensive in Salonika against the Turks, arguing that the armaments would be better used on the Western Front. And likewise he refused to send heavy artillery to the Italian campaign too. Throughout his tenure, this East versus West battle of ideas soured relations between the professional head of the army and the government, led by the equally fiery Prime Minister Lloyd George. Robertson backed Haig in not abandoning the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and in the Third Battle of Ypres, otherwise known as Passchendaele, in 1917. And he took a lot of flack from Lloyd George because of the losses that were entailed there. Eventually these clashes and the briefings against him became so much that in February 1918 Robertson resigned. At the end of the war, General Robertson was knighted by King George V. The two had during the war years developed a friendship, which wasn't bad for a Lincolnshire lad, was it? Sir William Robertson was now given command of the British Army of Occupation on the Rhine in Western Germany, and in 1920 he was promoted to the rank of Field Marshal, the highest rank in the British Army. He died in 1933, aged 73. He was a man who had recognised the danger presented to Britain by the Kaiser's Germany long before many others in the military had, and it was this strong belief that drove his Western strategy during the First World War. But it could also be argued that this single-minded approach proved incredibly costly when you see the graves on the Western Front. Having said that, was the Eastern argument really any better? So quite what Robertson's military legacy is remains open to very passionate debate. But one thing is clear, without a doubt. He remains the only man in the history of the British Army ever to have risen all the way from the very bottom to the very top. A man whose talents won the encouragement and support of people who shaped his career. The rector back in Lincolnshire, his commanding officer pushing him for a commission, and General Sir George White fighting his corner for a place at Staff College. From private to Field Marshal. In any circumstances, that is a remarkable achievement, and a life that should be remembered much more than it is. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so, as I've got loads more videos in the pipeline. What would you like to hear about in the future? comment below. And in the meantime, keep well, and I'll see you very soon.